Key point 1. Feel the spirit of Christmas crawling down your spine. One winter evening in 1843, a man was sitting at his table, carefully trying to find the perfect word to describe the most greedy and lonely human in all of England. Full of inspiration and confidence in this venture, the man neither minded the noise from his 5 children nor his publisher's anxiety. Christmas Eve crawled to the writer's door, and his pen ran toward the deadline. This man was none other than Charles Dickens, a notorious English writer who, upon his travels to Victorian Manchester, was so inspired to write a Christmas ghost story that it took him only 6 weeks to complete it. As a result, A Christmas Carol was born. I believe I have written a tremendous book. It will make a great uproar, I have no doubt. Charles Dickens. It would be an understatement to say A Christmas Carol has not changed the vision of this special day. Part of the reason why people cherish Christmas so profoundly is because of Charles Dickens and his Little Carol. This journey will uncover the secret to the remarkable longevity of this story by unwrapping the chronology of the writer's life and the events that inspired his genius. One little hint: values are considered fundamental for a reason. A Christmas Carol has never been out of print since its release in 1843. Upon meticulous study of Dickens' life, we will soon understand why Christmas had a special place in the writer's heart and why his depiction of this time of year is unlike anything else. They say that when you put your heart and soul into creating something, you are bound to create something beautiful. Key point 2. A Christmas Miracle for a Hopeless Genius. In October 1843, Charles Dickens was on the verge of bankruptcy. The horrible memories of his unfortunate childhood and infamous legacy, being the son of a naval pay clerk imprisoned for debt, must have haunted him when he created one of the most recognizable money grubbers in literature, Ebenezer Scrooge. Condemned to work since age 12 due to his family's lousy spending, Charles Dickens did not like to recall or discuss his childhood as a wealthy and affluent writer. However, he discovered his talent because of the need to earn a living. Dickens naturally trained his eye to notice all society's eccentric, frail, and uncomfortable things. His intelligence later made him a fortune and a reputation. Successful since his very first job at the Morning Chronicle as a nonfiction writer, he created a literary buzz, or better said, which was his pseudonym at the time. Confidence and perseverance are the secrets of writing talent. As the author of Street Sketches, the posthumous papers of the Pickwick Club, Nicholas Nickleby, The Old Curiosity Shop, and one of the most prominent pieces of realism in literature, Oliver Twist, Charles Dickens surfed the growing waves of his popularity with each book. In the early 19th century, new marketing struck the UK's literary universe. Some family book retailers transformed into bookshops, while others delved into publishing. Dickens saddled up progress at its epicenter, selling his books to almost 1/4 of the readers in the country. Unfortunately, in 1841, the horse of success threw Dickens off with Barnaby Rudge, one of his most suffered works. A tour of America was meant to reignite the momentum, but it failed to live up to expectations. Upon his return home, Dickens was disappointed and commercially impotent. Readers received his novels American Notes and Martin Chuzzlewit coldly. The writer struggled to pay off his debt for the failed Barnaby Rudge to Chapman and Hall, his long-term publishers. But far more horrifying than the financial loss was the decreasing interest of his readers. A child of poverty, Dickens had nothing to back up this unlucky period. He needed a literal Christmas miracle to save him. Key point 3. Catching fire at The Entrance to Hell Realized. At that moment, it seemed like Charles Dickens had lost everything. His marriage to his wife Catherine tore along the seams as she was expecting a 10th child. His career was uncertain, and so were his finances. However, the glory of Dickens' great works saved his reputation as a literary celebrity when he set foot onto the filthy and putrid streets of Manchester in 1843. Unlikely as it may sound, this place was destined to turn the writer's life around. What is now known as part of the Manchester Art Gallery used to be the Manchester Athenaeum, a hive for aspiring propagators of accessible knowledge. Dickens shared the same vision. Moreover, the author demonstrated active concern with the lower class, as a descendant. When he arrived in that industrial but God-forsaken city, he was a celebrity, living evidence of rags to riches, even when it was not entirely accurate at that stage of his life. Remember your roots to keep the ground under your feet. But why did he even go to Manchester? Out of pure compassion for miserable and apathetic citizens? Or was it something else? It turns out he was lured there by his sister, Frances. She married and moved to Manchester and was canny enough to find his voice a place in the Athenaeum. Dickens had already given multiple speeches before. This one, however, splurged with contagious passion over the Manchester laborers. Dickens spoke in the company of two prominent political activists, Richard Cobden and Benjamin Disraeli, who were equally passionate about regular people's lives. The writer encouraged workers to feel worthy of rest and intellectual improvement. He encouraged them to have a little learning to claim a better job after the diminishing effect of the 1841 to 1842 economic depression. The writer did not shun a visit to one of the local schools, the Field Lane School. His astonishment and dismay opened the eyes of the principal, motivating her to seek funding for cleaner and more convenient classrooms. As Dickens was leaving the school in surprisingly high spirits, he found himself plotting a new story. Suddenly his feelings started overflowing into the familiar images of Tiny Tim, Marley, and Ebenezer Scrooge. Key point 4. If you want to be served well, serve yourself first. Upon his return from Manchester, Charles Dickens could not think of anything else but the Christmas story he was eager to create. According to the writer's friend Cornelius Felton, Dickens used to take long walks through London's late-night streets, compiling the story in his head. For a man handicapped with debts, family troubles, and writing block, he was intrigued and excited. It was a matter of weeks before Christmas, and Charles Dickens committed to producing A Christmas Carol before December 25th. However, Chapman and Hall did not share their client's thrill, mainly because they witnessed the publishing fiasco with Martin Chuzzlewit. John Forster, a famous literary critic and friend of Dickens, also warned him of the public's fickleness. But the writer did not have a scrap of doubt about the success of his little Carol, as he named it lovingly. When Chapman and Hall refused to support Dickens' new endeavor to the fullest, there was a moment when the writer considered leaving his publishers. It took some effort from Forster to talk his friend out of such a reckless move. Then the compromise followed. Dickens took full responsibility for his writing, editing, illustrating, advertising, and selling his future book. The publishers had only to print it. Sometimes letting your passion splurge is an unexpected road to success. A grave believer in his success, Dickens immersed himself in writing so deeply he had to cancel all social gatherings with friends, family, and even his lawyer. He edited his text zealously, with only Forster allowed to propose changes. Dickens also snatched one of the most promising illustrators of the Victorian era, John Leech. Dickens' touch was felt in the colors of the robes of the Ghost of Christmas Present. They must be green, with no exceptions. After 6 weeks of meticulous work, A Christmas Carol was ready. Enchanted by Christmas, Dickens had poured his soul onto the paper. A story that sat deep in his mind even before the Manchester trip, he wrote The Story of the Goblins Who Stole a Sexton, resembling Carol's Mood, 7 years prior, which was finally released to critical acclaim. The story for generations was born. Key point 5. A Not-So-Merry Christmas. The release of A Christmas Carol reinvented Charles Dickens' life. It had brought a miracle, but it had also carried some trouble. As the author wrote page after page tirelessly, painful memories and associations weaved into the story to reflect his experiences. Charles Dickens cherished Christmas as compensation for his unfortunate childhood. At the same time, the day was being reimagined and reinstated by intellectuals like Walter Scott and Washington Irving. For centuries, Christmas endured many troubles, much like its devotee, Charles. Originating from a heathen tradition, Christmas received its date, December 25th, through the efforts of Pope Julius I. The aim was to link it to the pagan fast Saturnalia to turn more people towards Christianity. Ironically, the Bacchanal traditions took over, with drinking, carding, and other lawlessness more associated with Christmas than carol bells. However, as the Enlightenment urged rationality and temperance, the Nativity's chaos soon faded, as political figures like Benjamin Franklin and Nathaniel Ames supported moderate seasonal celebrations. Learning the history of Christmas brings more awareness to its celebration. That said, the image of contemporary Yule was forming itself during Dickens' time. The writer's contribution to the Christmas spirit turned out to be significant. Before him, almost no one considered this day about family unity and humanism as much as he did with A Christmas Carol. The Cratchit family, especially Tiny Tim, was relatable to the majority, while the redemption of Ebenezer Scrooge inspired hope for universal salvation. May it haunt their houses pleasantly, and no one wish to lay it. Charles Dickens. Some literary speculations hint at Dickens' reference to his struggles when writing A Carol. His poor childhood and financially irresponsible parents, who forced their son to work to support the family, must have been encapsulated in the image of Scrooge. As a son tired of funding his parents, Dickens fits his moral unease in this character. His financial struggles continued even after the book's successful release. The first edition of 6,000 copies was sold in 4 days. And a short period of happiness. Several American and national publishers profited from their retelling of A Carol by selling them as the original story. The ensuing legal battle almost drained Dickens' pockets. Despite the eventual victory, he found himself with debt and disappointment. He brought the Christmas spirit to every home in 1843, but was left empty-handed. Key point 6. Somehow, Dickens unwittingly destroyed the goose business. When we talk about Charles Dickens as a Prometheus of Victorian Christmas, it would be unfair to mention him as the sole hero. Before Dickens, the tradition of the Nativity celebration appeared more than a century prior. In 1712, the English poet Joseph Addison described the cheer and warmth of Christmas to relieve the suffering from poverty and cold. Sir Walter Scott, Dickens' literary predecessor, made a colorful description of a Christmas table with pie and goose, crackling firewood, and carol singers. Washington Irving, a contemporary of Dickens, brushed over the Christmas traditions in The Sketchbook of Geoffrey Crayon. However, their style was gloomy, corresponding with the London of that time. On the other hand, Dickens brought a completely different Christmas atmosphere. The secret to Carol's success is the virtuous, almost naive education. Through a ghost story, usually menacing and eerie, Dickens writes with inviting and informative telling. He never intended to write a haunting or serious tale. Instead, he chose to educate under the cover of entertainment. Critics argue that Dickens, a known contender for organized religious rites, condemned their hypocritical character by depicting the nativity practices he considered more humanistic and derived from Christ. Using Ebenezer Scrooge and the Cratchit family as social polarities, Dickens illustrated the consequences of greed and selfishness as opposed to unity and cherishing. The glue that stuck these worlds together was, undoubtedly, Tiny Tim. A sick but kind boy had a real prototype. Charles's younger brother, lovingly called Tiny Fred, suffered from rickets. Modern Christmas is a love child of rootless traditions and successful marketing. Aside from the humanism dissemination, Charles had quite a marketing effect with A Christmas Carol. He became a legitimate enemy of the Victorian goose business. Hundreds of families on both sides of the Atlantic rushed to buy a turkey for the feast, following Scrooge's generous gift to the Cratchits, the big prize turkey, twice the size of Tiny Tim. Sending greeting cards was another widespread custom that spread as A Carol possessed Victorian Christmas. English public servant Sir Henry Cole figured out how to mass-produce Christmas cards by lithographing 1,000 identical greetings. Finally, the ghost of Christmas present in A Carol is no other than one of the ancestors of Santa Claus. For Dickens, it was a green-robed spirit with a bare chest. The droll and overweight grandpa appeared after the 1931 Coca-Cola seasonal promotion. Not much of an innovator, Dickens consolidated all the nativity customs we now practice. Key point 7. When ups and downs follow your genius. If Dickens foresaw the eventual uproar of A Christmas Carol, his writing to Forster would have been less hysterical and depressed. It is understandable. The quick £1,000 he expected to make from A Carol paid publishers and the illustrator. His carefully furnished house near the equally famous 221B Baker Street flat required maintenance, just like his children. Dickens eventually had to leave his flat and his publishers. As a solution, he decided to publish a consecutive Christmas story and move to the continent. He packed his life in suitcases and moved to Italy, hoping to retreat. Artists are not entities floating over ordinary troubles. They sense them the most. At the same time, A Christmas Carol was gaining momentum. Despite the general unprofitability of theatrical adaptations, Dickens was an avid theater lover. He had some experience in school theater and even directed and acted in short plays in Montreal during his American tour. The Strange Gentleman, written in 1838, was one of Dickens' most successful dramatic attempts. No wonder A Carol seemed perfect for the stage, with its exhaustive plot and colorful characters. The most successful adaptation was A Christmas Carol, past, present, and future. Further film and radio adaptations have expanded Dickens' legacy beyond his lifetime. The 1951 movie Scrooge is considered the best adaptation attempt. However, the modern audience may prefer the 2007 movie starring Jim Carrey. As for the late 1980s, there were more than 225 films, television plays, and stage and radio adaptations. Paul Davis, the Dickens scholar, argues that all of Carol retellings have mingled in the very core of Western culture. A Little Carol was not so little, after all. The European retreat had a positive influence on Dickens. The following years saw The Chimes, 1844, The Cricket of the Hearth, 1845, The Battle of Life, 1846, and The Haunted Man, 1848, published. The Carol's Christmas successors. The writer's life stayed erratic. David Copperfield, 1849, and Bleak House, 1852 to 1853, were recognized successes, but his personal life crumbled. In 1858, he divorced Catherine, and sometime later, rumors of his romance with actress Ellen Ternan sparked. However, the formerly public Dickens threw a privacy cloak on his life. So today's reader can only imagine the love intricacies of this literary virtuoso. Conclusion. Charles Dickens never shunned away from the audience. As someone who grew to prominence through poverty and childhood trauma, Dickens empathized with needy families who preserved love and unity. A family man capable of reflection and affinity, he revived the Christmas spirit in England and beyond. For someone forced to work since their teenage years, Christmas was when little Charles could dream about a better life. Ebenezer Scrooge, a stable image of greed and eventual mercy, and Tiny Tim, a symbol of benevolence and unconditional hope, emphasize the importance of community and goodwill. However, one dares not to call Dickens' success luck. Known for his perseverance and literary vision, Dickens spent years writing before A Christmas Carol saw the world. The book was a breakthrough from a creative crisis and a symbol of renewal for the author. The story had given the writer a second chance in quite a peculiar place, the dirty streets of Victorian Manchester. But the story it inspired follows, or better said, haunts, families around the globe every Christmas. Of course, Dickens did not invent Christmas how we know it today, but he was the one who popularized traditions we consider typical for Christmas. Big roasted turkeys salute him from overflowing feast tables. But most importantly, Charles Dickens created a story that reminds us, year after year, of the reason to love and cherish each other and be grateful for the smallest things. Try this. Watch the BBC docuseries, Dickens, with 3 hour-long episodes on Christmas Eve. Make a traditional Victorian drink for Christmas, wassail, resembling mulled wine. Play old Christmas games like Reverend Crawley's Game, Kim's Game, or charades.